It's good to see Sarah, Diane, Daniel, Sabrina, Agnes looks very puzzled. That puppy picture. Hi, Sabrina. Catherine. We're expecting it. A lot of people that just come tumbling in today. We're excited that you're joining us. And if you'd like to share your name, where you're coming from in the chat, you're welcome to do that. Even a little bit about what your network is focused on. You see the Nourishing Networks Consortium. Are you about food?
Well, we're about nourishing the soul.
Oh, food does that and much more. Beautiful. Diane, is the water behind you something that a place that you've been?
Well, I'm sitting on an island in the mouth of Howe Sound near Vancouver. And although this is not the view from where I sit, it is a view from the island over to, actually to the mainland. So we're not far from the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. So anyways, I can change it if you like.
I know, it looks like home to me. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and so I venture to places like that often, and so that's
yeah, I'm lucky to be able to live and work from here most of the time.
Someone's coming in from Berlin, which is a different place, and people are starting to share a little bit. Oh, Scott, you're also a neighbor up here in the Pacific Northwest.
Northwest representation here.
Yeah, I'm here. Anna's coming in from New York. Got people from across the pond. Nicole, I've met before. She lives in South Africa. Where else are folks coming in from?
Yeah, I grew up in Vienna. Yay.
Oh, wow, nice.
We've got Virginia in the house. That's good. Maybe a smaller group than we think.
It's okay.
Adrian, are people receiving recordings from the festival sessions that they're unable to attend?
We upload them all on the YouTube channel, so I can put it in the chat. Yeah.
Philadelphia, Sarah, let me know if I pronounce this right. Nitschon? Nice to say the name of the festival. Nice to do it. Chicago, a lot of people from the US. Wow. I'm used to being in places that are very, very global, so this seems like a high representation. Great. Well, what do you think, Anna? Should we get going?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's launch. And people may join us, but I'm a big fan of that principle of, is it World Cafe or one of those approaches that the people in the space are exactly the right people. So welcome everyone. Good morning. And thank you well, it's probably not morning for all of you. It is for me. But really appreciate you being here with us today for this Phyto Network event on designing your own ripple effects mapping session. We shared in advance, and I don't know how many of you got to watch it. The recording from an earlier presentation that I had done with Circle Generation, Carrie and Nono, who I think will be joining us later, their organization. And that will also be available to you. So it's sitting in an email someplace if you haven't watched it yet. But that may give a little more background about sort of the history, the ethics, the general practice of ripple effects mapping. Today, we are going to focus on how to design your own plan for your own ripple effects mapping work. And to do that, I'm going to share a little bit more about the process in more detail. And we're going to do a brief fishbowl sample REM session so you can see how that works. If you're not familiar with the phrase fishbowl, it's used in a lot of different facilitation approaches. And it basically means having a smaller group of people do the thing, use the technique that we're talking about, while others watch and learn from how they are doing it. So Carrie is going to be asking for maybe 5 volunteers in just a moment. I wanted to share also that part of what really excites us about ripple effects mapping, it's not just that you get good stories and good data, and that it helps you to see unintended impacts that you might not otherwise have access to, but it really is also an occasion often for joy, for celebration, because it's an appreciative process. And it lifts up interaction and connectivity. It depends on multiple ways of knowing stories, human interactions and connections, mapping. And most of all, it's really rooted in the awareness that every spark of energy, right, that we put out into the world creates these ripples. And every initiative or program is casting multiple ripples at any time. And most of our evaluation processes struggle to capture those. And so we are hoping that this approach will help you, as it has helped me, capture more of these exciting kind of network ripples and changes. So Carrie, would you like to help us find some volunteers?
Sure. So our ripple effect mapping question for our fishbowl has something to do with networks and convenings. And I'm not going to give it all away, but what we would like to know is for the initiation of the fishbowl, are there people in this group who have facilitated or helped to bring together a convening of a larger group of people or a network within the last year? And if that's true, just so we can see how many people it's true for, raise your hand if you've been involved in facilitating. Okay, yeah, I see a good number of people. Okay, so now of those people, we're wondering if 6 of you would be willing to volunteer and tell us a 2-minute story about this convening as part of the fishbowl. So if you're willing to volunteer, can you actually push the button where it says react in your toolbar and raise your hand? And that way we will know that we can call upon you for volunteers. So we aren't going to put you on the spot, Ricky. All right, we've got 1. Who else might be here? Scott, I see 2. This is great. Juliana. Fernando. Okay. Anna, are you taking down the names? Diane?
I
think that
did
makes
not. I was noticing. So Zev also volunteered in the chat.
Okay, great. So I think we've got our 6.
Okay. Can you recite those again for me?
Yeah, there's Ricky and Juliana. And you can see them across the top of the screen. Fernando, Diane, Scott.
Love it. Yay. Thank you all so much. All right, great. So I am going to drop in the chat very briefly the question, just in case you volunteers will find it soothing to know in advance what this is. Pardon the awkward bullet points formatting, And so while you are thinking a little bit about that, I am going to share with you a slide that explains a little bit more the process. Yes. All right. So not sure, I'm hoping, is this big enough that you all can read it? I can try and make it a little bit bigger, but the slideshow option messes things up. Okay, great. So this is the rhythm in general of a ripple effects mapping session. We welcome everyone to the space. We explain what we're here for. We offer the question, the one I just dropped in chat, and every session has a different question. It's part of sort of the fine art of doing this work, is deciding for yourself or with your team what the right question will be for your goals. And then you give people 5 to 10 minutes to prepare their story. Now, a typical ripple effects mapping session is 90 minutes to 2 hours. We are going to take less than 30 for this whole sample. So this is going to be a really sort of rushed little process, but we just wanted to give you a taste of kind of how it works. After people have had some individual reflection time, we pair folks up for appreciative interviewing. Now, one of the things that I love about ripple effects mapping is that it is a sneaky occasion to teach appreciative interviewing much more broadly than it is normally taught. There is a miniature little guide to it that I created that's designed to support a ripple effects mapping process. Carrie, would you be able to drop the link to that in the chat if you haven't already? That would be most helpful. And actually, the sample REM agenda would be helpful too at this point, so people can kind of follow along to see what it is we are talking about here. So appreciative interviewing, in short, is an effort for, in pairs, one person to tell their story and the other to ask questions designed to deepen that person's own understanding, to give them greater access to their own inner wisdom, and to help them identify the aspects of the story that are maybe most essential for this process. Then everyone comes back to the main group. Some of you are now thinking, wait, is this online or is this in person? You can do it either way. Works beautifully in an online context as well as, of course, in person. So when everyone comes back together, it's time for group storytelling. And in person, your facilitator might be the same person as your mapper. They'll be standing up at the front of the room and they'll say, okay, who has a story that they want to share? And they will then map these stories. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. I also encourage you to have as many mappers as you would like. And so you are invited today, if you would like to use whatever concept mapping software you would like, or pencil and paper, whatever. But if you would like to map the stories as people are sharing them today, as our volunteers are sharing them, that will give you just a small taste of some of the challenge and the beauty of this process. And so that really takes up the bulk of the time in a typical session. That's about an hour. And then we do a process that a friend of mine dubbed beholding, which I love, where we all step back and look together at this map that we've created. And we see what's missing, what are the themes that are cropping up, what patterns might be emerging. And so it's a group meaning-making process around the map. So that is in brief what we will do. I am also going to share my XMind map. So I like to use XMind as my network mapping, story mapping software. And what I do before a session is create something like this, where I put the question in the middle. And then as each person tells their story, I will put their name in here and I will be mapping their story sort of off to the edges. And this gets really complicated and messy. I can show you later if you want an image of what it looks like when I do this in person, which is vastly sloppier and messier, but it's also fun and interesting. And so as more and more people do their own mapping process, it also increases our capacity to do some comparison and to see, you know, what did one person emphasize that another missed, et cetera. So volunteers, and I saw Faduma showed up as well while I was talking. Welcome. Faduma had volunteered via email to be part of this fishbowl. So if you are willing, let me drop again, just in case, because I never trust. People say that Zoom now makes its chat visible to everyone once they enter. But for so many years, you had to repost everything for the person coming new. So I'm reposting the question there. And so why don't we take just a moment or two? Oh, good. Okay, so we don't have. Someday someone will explain to me the setting that makes that possible. So Carrie, if you don't mind reposting documents, I know you're about to do that. Thank you all. So let's take just maybe 1 minute. Those of you who are volunteers can begin to prepare your story. These should be brief. And I do like to emphasize that a story is different from an accounting, right? A story may have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It may have a main character, it may have action. And it's not a huge thing if you don't have that, but I have learned, I do this a lot with American academics, and there's a vast resistance often to telling the story. And what we get instead is, you know, I observed that this phenomenon and this phenomenon happened, which is still useful, but we sometimes miss the nuance of kind of first person. Sarah, yes, yes. Positivism, empiricism, yes. These are things we struggle with in REM. So, trusting that you have some sense of your story, we would ordinarily drop everyone in breakout groups. In this fishbowl process, that's going to be complicated and sloppy. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to ask for one volunteer. I'm going to mimic what an appreciative interview might look like. So would one of you like to pretend that you're in a breakout room with me? And we can do just a brief appreciative interview process together. Ricky, I see you nodding. Is that a yay? Awesome. Would you like to share your story with me? I know it's with all of us, but we'll pretend.
I'm going to put the two of you on the spotlight.
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I recently worked with a movement, a social movement, that had had a lot of success in getting global policy done. But I was working with the Southern and Eastern African region, and they had been asked to assess their work by the core donor. It's a big movement of small farmers and agriculturalists across the region, and they have sub-movements in different countries. There were many different languages, so we had to think very carefully about how we get them to share what they have succeeded on and also reflect on maybe what they could improve on. And it was done in multiple processes, in-country processes, in sub-network processes until we reached the bigger process. So the question was how the convenings made a difference to the network and its participants. Because they were different convenings, they were sometimes very different outcomes. So for example, the convening around the gender-based violence aspect of the network, they were able to articulate better how they had been doing the gender-based violence work, and they were able to notice what are the gaps. So they managed to have a discussion around how do you engage with men and feminism. because they had aimed at feminism. And this helped them to really think about, okay, so if we're being feminists, then engaging with men is not only as allies, but to really get them to see that gender applies to everyone and that the violence is something that affects everyone. For the whole movement, some of the differences it made is it gave them an opportunity to see the gaps in their work. For example, they really realized that they're struggling with policy work in the African region because policy changes happen so fast across so many different countries. And actually, they're a movement of farmers. They don't do policy work. So it helped them to realize that, okay, we need to build relationships to help us to contribute to policy work. In the current context, everyone is suffering with fundraising. So by getting together, convening, discussing, they were able to think about how do we share our fundraising resources. So collectively, some of us are really good fundraisers, some of us are not. How do we begin to share so that collectively the whole movement is developing in the same way? And then I would say one of the biggest things was just a confidence to speak to the donor who'd asked for the assessment and to be able to say, the things you ask of us, here's what makes us struggle with them as a movement. Remember, we're farmers, we're out farming, and we don't want to be caught in the bureaucracy of engaging with a donor. But they also had the opportunity to think about what the donor needs, because the donor was saying, well, but I do need some documentation, and we do have these kinds of processes and problems. And they were able to then say, okay, here is how we will show accountability within our own movement values. Here's the kinds of documents we can put in place that will show accountability. It's not what you ask, but it's what we can do that makes sense for us.
I love that. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. So if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like 3, maybe 4 kind of big changes or functions emerged from these convenings. The first was sort of a deepening, yes, of awareness, of knowledge, and opportunity to go to new places, thinking together in new ways. Okay. The second, it sounds like, began as a gap analysis, but quickly then identified this policy need, which creates an opportunity for sharing resources and strategizing in new ways.
That's right.
The third, around fundraising, it sounds like, was both about sharing and again identifying new mechanisms for enabling sort of the stories of farmers to move toward donors. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. So how would you identify, how do you think that the practice of the convening itself was what gave rise to this? You know, many networks can create good opportunities online or, you know, put the right people in touch so that exciting stuff can emerge. But it sounds like in each of these cases, this was a real step upward based on these convenings. And I'm wondering if you can share more about why. Like, was it something about how the convenings were designed or how the space was held? Were people made to feel more comfortable? Were they meeting mostly with people they already knew? Were there aspects of that convening practice that you can identify?
I think that number one, it was about design and co-design, let me say. So we as the assessment team, we understood that we are working within a system and it's not a top-down approach. And so it was co-designing both with the funding partner and with the grantee partner. In that way, we got to the questions that they both are curious about. The second thing we did was kind of just look at the material participation. What does it take for people to really participate? So as I said, we were across different countries, so we had translations. We subsidized data so that people could be able to join the convenings and could participate. And we spent a lot of time making sure that each of the little sub-networks and substructures had enough time to let all the members know you can participate in this discussion and to negotiate time and all of that, so that people can be present, to participate. And then I think it was also about the questions we asked. So we didn't ask questions about what has succeeded, what has not worked. We really went into the detail of, your movement is really curious about how people are doing fundraising. How have you done that in your context?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, well, that is so helpful. And we have also modeled, because Ricky's story is so rich and complex and multifaceted, we've also modeled one of the big changes of ripple effects mapping, which is, how do we sort of shrink down or focus in on a smaller component? And that has to be carefully identified ahead of time. And so the practice of convenings, we know, was one of the key interests. And so that is why my question, we could have gone in a million directions, right? About these exciting things that you learned, about the processes that emerged from it, about the impacts, and the work unfolding from those discoveries. But because convening itself was the central question, my appreciative interview question was designed to bring you back to, what was it about the convening? And your answers were enormously helpful. I'm taking notes myself about, okay, make sure co-design, make sure the material conditions, make sure that anything that would keep people from bringing their fullest presence is managed in advance. So that's very useful. And in this appreciative interview process, where it's normally 5 minutes or so that each person is kind of the focus person and gets questions, part of what we're doing is refining the story that we're going to share, so that when we come to then the group interview, everyone has a story that they can offer in 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever it might be, which again, takes a lot of discipline, and it's hard to shrink things down. Thank you so much, Ricky. That's really, really helpful. So what I think we'll do now, Carrie, if this sounds right to you, is gather a couple of additional stories. So we will now sort of model the group interview process. And I will share my screen so you all can watch. It means you won't see my face while we are doing this part of the process, but that's part of the challenge. Let's see, is this the right one? Yes, excellent. Okay, and so what I would ordinarily do is, if Ricky were the one going first, see, I'm smushing together our faux appreciative interview and our faux group storytelling session. But I would take notes about the convening impacts, which would be things about the deepening of discussions, what was the other one? The fundraising, the sharing of resources, the gap analysis. Actually, fundraising and sharing of resources were the same, but do you see what I'm doing in terms of the general flow here? And I would also create convening methods, because we also talked about that. And so that might be things about co-design. It might be about managing material needs, etc. And so because I have already heard Ricky's story in depth, and I can do this very condensed sort of thematic summary of it, the next person who tells their story, though, I'm going to be hearing it for the first time. And so I am likely to be more kind of verbatim tracking what it is that you are talking about. So could we have a volunteer to share just a 2-minute story? Who did we have? We had Juliana. Oops, I can't pull it up right now, or it will. Actually, no, it won't. Juliana, Fernando, Diane, Scott, would one of you like to share your response, share your story with us briefly?
Yes, I can go.
Thank you, Fernando.
Okay.
Awesome. Go for it.
Okay. So this is about a meeting, actually not a meeting, a co-design process for around 30 organizations from Latin America. The objective was to co-design financial and non-financial mechanisms to strengthen democracies in the region. And it was a 3-day in total workshop with all 30 organizations. And yeah, it was I think it was very valuable for the process, for what we needed to do, but it was also very valuable for everyone involved, because I did some pre-work. Of course, I did interview some of them like one-on-ones, and I had certain hypotheses about what were the main what could be the main outcomes or topics interesting for them. But from day one, things started to emerge, and conversations among them that were very valuable. And actually, the way I was naming the topics was needed to be rewritten with different words.
Okay.
So that was very valuable, and I think we gave a lot of space for those conversations during the first day. It wasn't planned to dedicate so much time for it, but it was absolutely necessary, and then things started to flow differently. And yeah, it was very day 2 and day 3 were very fun, because then because we had this we were able to to put in the same words, and in words that everyone felt represented, and it was a lot of learning for myself and for all the organizing team to yeah.
Awesome. And so the conversations that you're talking about, it sounds like the in-personness was part of what was so important, because yep, okay. I just
Yes,
wanted to
definitely.
ground truth that. And when you said topics had to be renamed,
Yes.
this is typical, right? In any complex network organization, that we use whatever our own language is, and so we must do this kind of a process. Can you give some examples of, maybe a term that emerged as the chosen term, and why that
Yes.
was important?
Yes. I remember this was a couple of years ago, but there was one term that I remember very clearly, and I was using the term marginalized. I don't know if I'm saying it right in English.
Yes.
Communities, and a few people were very like, they stopped me like right there. I mean, it was an open conversation, but it wasn't the way it had to be. Underrepresented communities, because when you stay marginalized, you are marginalizing those communities. You're reproducing that, and I never imagined that,
Right.
and that was very important to change.
Beautiful. Yes. Yeah, and as a co-design process too. Yeah, to make sure that people can name and claim the terms that really describe them. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Do we have maybe one more example? I think we have time for maybe just one more, and then we can talk a little bit about what this framing process. Thank you again, Fernando and Ricky, for your very rich, appreciative interview process with me. Oh, I forgot to mention it. What was that?
I know that we have Baduomo volunteers, so
Oh, great. Great, great.
that might be someone to bring forward.
I also, did I just see Diane's hand go
I
up?
saw Diane's hand come up too.
Y'all pick, somebody jump in.
Diane, if you'd like to go, I'm happy to.
Great,
You can
thank
go if you want, Fadumo, but all right, yeah, you've got your names on the board, so it's you.
Okay.
Well, if we have time,
Oh.
Diane, we'll come to you too.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Being voluntold, got it. I like it. Okay, so my convening experience, it was a second convening where I think the stories maybe like more relevant to the work here. So I'm on a project where we're working with like a number of organizations across the country here in the US that specifically focus on young people that are re-entering from incarceration, or they have families that have that. So they are kind of like providing the components of like positive youth development, so like how to help them establish connections and belonging and all these things. And so for this convening, we've already established a framework and some principles that are important to the groups that they already gave feedback on. So co-design is like super, super important. And one of the things that really stuck with them that they wanted to emphasize for this year was on the concept of healing. And so we had some external speakers come in, and what ended up happening is that so for the groups that we work with, the representatives that join us are 2 staff members and 2 emerging adults who are a part of the group. So everybody is represented there, those who are providing the service and those who are receiving the service, and everybody's in the room together. And what we learned from this, and I'm now realizing I sound very positive. I did not realize it was an insult, but
Bring it on. It's not. It's not. There's so many ways to think and be.
It's, you know, like you just pick up because this is the language that you use at work. So, but for us, it was what came of this. 2 things came of it is that, and we didn't have it planned, is that halfway through day 1 of the convening, because they kept talking about all these strategies for those who do the care work, the young people kind of started to ask for, but can we have a separate session to ourselves? So after lunch, we had to create a separate session. And one of the speaker that we had already had this curriculum to separate them. So it was easy. Thankfully, that was in place. So we separated them. And for the staff that remained, we kind of just had to wing it and just ask like, okay, well, maybe if we start talking about what everybody's working on, it'll direct us. So whatever facilitation guide I had for the afternoon out the window, and we ended up just everybody told stories of the different things that they're doing, and then if it connected and it, you know, like resonated with somebody else, they'll be like, oh, I've been trying to do that. And so then you create relationships. And this is something that we did in the beginning, where we would try to pair them up kind of randomly so that they have an opportunity to talk with each other. But that turns out like they don't have the time, or they can't make the time unless you just put them all in a room and say, okay, now you all talk. And then those relationships started forming. So the relationships that we thought would form from the one-on-one that we assigned pre-convening formed during the convening, because everybody now had space to just talk and say, oh, you are doing the financial literacy programming. We've been trying to do it. What has worked for you? And then they start exchanging stories. So the co-learning, just the space, I think sometimes And if everybody's thinking about the same thing of the intent is healing, then I think that puts you in a specific mind frame. And yeah, that's
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right, thank you so much. So we ordinarily, as I said, would have a lot more time for this process. What we're going to do instead is look at this map. I'm curious, did anybody else make a map while people were talking? Just put your hand. Okay. Okay. So if you did, take a look at it and let's see, because as you know, concept mapping can happen in any different way. Every brain does it differently. And even here, because I had the benefit of hearing Ricky's story and summarizing, this is qualitatively different, right, from everything else. Fernando and Faduma's stories are essentially verbatim, with me simply using the organization to try and track, what the different aspects of the conversation are. And this, by the way, is also a complex and imperfect practice. But given what we have here, and given what some of you may have sketched or noticed for yourselves, let's do a little bit of what we call the beholding practice. And I know it's hard because you can't see my map in one fell swoop. But you have also just heard a small number of stories, and that is as important as the map. What we are trying to do now is to identify themes and or gaps. Sometimes key questions emerge from this. So what I like to do in the beholding is to make a separate little floating topic here for myself as a way of noticing what people are sharing. So, who has an observation?
I would say flexibility in the facilitation methods. Nobody was too tied to their predetermined guide.
Okay. Yes.
Jenny, I see your hand. Do you want to come in?
The co-development came up so much, whether before the convening or during it, but it seemed a really big theme.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Oh, sorry, I don't have my speaker on. Co-development.
Co-development. Yes. Okay. I was guessing that you were saying that, but it didn't fully come through, and I didn't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, and I'm adding co-design here. This is, as you practice this more and more, aspects of the practice begin to emerge. So for example, I know that I am a pretty involved facilitator. So I will do things like summarize in my own words or ask clarifying questions. Sometimes I identify patterns midway through the process, and then I may say, hang on a second, the last 4 people have all mentioned such and such. Hands up, is that true for you too? And it's often one of the ways that we discover really significant impacts that might be common across everybody, but that, nobody thought was central enough to name. So any other
I'm seeing in the
observations?
chat one from Juliana, who says the value of co-creation and participatory inquiry.
Ooh. Yes, absolutely.
Diane, and then Sen.
Yeah, I think I heard, and without being able to see the whole map, it's a little hard to confirm that, spontaneous discussion that was encouraged or supported by the facilitation process was important to building trust.
Yep.
Sen.
I heard that there was something about revealing the potential of the people who are in the network through the creation of new connections or building upon existing connections, and then finding ways for the network to support itself.
Katie.
San had it exactly. I really found it quite cool to see how people wanted to have connections ahead of their convenings, but really it was at the convenings themselves that those connections became more genuine and fruitful. But I think it's quite tied to the last point as well.
Yes. Beautiful.
One of the
All
things
right.
I noticed, if I may, is a kind of shifting of the center of gravity where the participants were holding and framing the issues according to their own perspectives or what they felt were important, and that kind of empowerment of what happens when we're together, learning together and finding our center seems really important to happen in the spaciousness that the conversations are given. So kind of the thing that happened and the context that helped nurture it.
Beautiful. All right. So this is just a teeny snapshot. We want to make sure that you have time to design your own process. A lot of people, I will note, ask at this stage, well, now what do you do with this? And there are many answers. We're going to talk more about that in the community of practice. But just quickly, some of the simplest, when you identify themes and strengths to build on, of course, you can bake those into the work more intentionally. Many times the stories themselves are really powerful. And if you do this online, you can record the whole thing. And then you have these fantastic testimonials that people will often use in, fundraising efforts or in reports or in, marketing of some kind. Those of you who are fans of the kinds of qualitative data work that are not necessarily my favorite, but might be your favorite and can be very useful here. Lots of folks will code all of this data and use NVivo or some other qualitative software to crunch that in various ways. I like if we are assessing a program and we know that it has certain intended outcomes, it is possible to look at everything that you learned in light of those outcomes. And you can even create like a little table, if your dean or funder or whoever wants that, that can help you map out really clearly, okay, one important goal of this convening was identifying fundraising strategies. Well, Ricky's story told us concretely that that happened in some specific ways. We didn't ask on the others. If you know that meeting those objectives is a goal of your assessment practice with ripple effects mapping, you can also, as a facilitator, bake those questions in. So I remember Ricky mentioned fundraising, but Fernando Faduma, I didn't hear you talk specifically about that. Would either of you like to add anything about how this convening contributed perhaps to the fundraising ecosystem or practices? So that's just a few notes on practice. Yay! And now we are all back together. It looks like there is a huge array of gorgeous commentary in chat. But I did want to ask if there were any questions about process at this point before we move into design your own. I'm sure you have many, many questions. If there's something that is rising to the top for you, that will be really valuable as you move into your own ripple effects mapping design practice. Drop it in the chat or just speak up.
Yeah, I can come up with a question here. So in the nourishing networks, we've got about 8 different nourishing network groups throughout the region in Seattle. around the different municipalities that we have on the east side, Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, etc. And each of those groups meet monthly, and it's about around our when somebody said is nourishing networks about food, I said it's about mind, body, and soul nourishing. And what we do is we gather as volunteers in each group. And there's usually about 20 in person and maybe 20 in a hybrid situation in each of these convenings. And it's we have a thing called the nourishing network model that we follow. We do these things that are it's very grassroots oriented. We start off with a gracious space ideas from Pat Hughes, and we kind of build those network trust relationships so they're pretty far along in all of this. We've been doing this since about 2012. And so to do mind mapping, see, basically the flow of the meetings go from you know each other, you get your relationships happening, and pretty soon you start to develop what it is you want to do. Our shared purpose is always, well, in general, it's who are we going to help today? Who can we help today? What problems are out there in our community? And it can be from anything. And we have a very diverse community, so we try to get all the voices in the room that are in a particular community. Like Woodinville is going to be very different from Kirkland, going to be very different from Renton. And so they have different ideas about what they want to try to do. The mind mapping process, I'm trying to see how to integrate that into that without interrupting that flow, because basically kind of the mind mapping happens in real time with these people, and it just goes boom, 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 and pretty soon we have asks and offers, and we have commitments, we have project coordinators, people that are looking to see, is there a project in here anywhere? Looks like there's a meaning that's starting to develop here that people are really interested in. Maybe it's a community free pantries, or maybe it's around food rescue, or maybe it's around a specific group that needs a lot of help. Could be a youth group, anything. And they form, and then it gets going, and then boom, so that's the hour and a half that usually happens. Now there's millions of different meetings that they have in their group during the course of the month.
Sure.
And then mapping that is impossible, because it's like in real time, people are texting each other, calling each other, emails, everything else. So I'm trying to see how can I integrate mind mapping into that without disrupting the flow.
Yes. No, it's a great question. And I think all networks struggle to a large extent, with this question of how do we organize these various visions and projects. I do want to emphasize that ripple effects mapping, generally speaking, although the techniques that it uses can be applied to a wide range of activities, including the sorts of things that you're talking about, including strategic planning. It's a marvelous strategic planning instrument. Often, though, the more classic, yes, Ricky, you can use it to plan ahead. So the most classic way is, perhaps your funders are curious. Roll with me. I don't know if you have funders, but let's pretend you do. And they are saying, well, how is Nourishing Networks really making a difference? You might arrange a set of ripple effects mapping sessions centered around the question, how has the work of Nourishing Networks changed your life or that of your communities? And so it's really asking a different question. It's not to catalog what we do or to organize it, for better volunteers or visibility. It's really trying to understand, we have been doing this stuff in the world. How has that changed the world, right? And so, Ricky, your question, can you use it moving ahead? Absolutely. I use it, most recently, for example, a college that I was doing this with, their Center for Community Engagement was trying to do a mix of looking back and planning ahead. And so one of the questions that I chose for them was, imagine that it is 10 years from today. What is a story that you want to be able to tell about change caused by this center? So 10 years from now, what will the world look like, and how did this center contribute to that? And it was beautiful because it's not asking the typical question of strategic planning, what should we do next? You know, what's the most important step? It's asking, envision the world you want to see, or in this case, the town you want to see, or the college you want to see. Pick an aspect of it that is super powerful and tell us that story and work backwards from there to how did this center cause that? And so that can be very, very rich. And again, it's a different question. So thank you so much, Scott, for that. And I don't know if I fully answered what you were hoping for, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat about this stuff. So yes, Sen, thank you. Designing the questions that we would use for different stakeholders. Let's pull up the document on designing your own REM session, and I'm going to walk you through it very briefly. Because this gets at that. So, and again, this is, you know, my own sort of way of thinking about this. Ripple effects mapping really is a practice more than a method. So there is a huge diversity of practices out there, and I encourage you to experiment. So I've highlighted the 3 questions that we're really going to focus on today in your breakout groups. What program or process do you want to map using REM and why? What are you hoping to learn or understand? What are some focused, open, and honest questions that might help you get at that learning or understanding? And who might you invite to this REM session to learn from? So these are kind of the 3 most essential strategic decision points. Since you asked your excellent question about questions, I will center that. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Parker Palmer, who's an American scholar, practitioner, and teacher. He founded something called the Center for Courage and Renewal, and they have some really beautiful facilitative guidelines. And one of their practices is open and honest questions. You should have access to this document. I didn't check that link this morning, so it's possible that it's not working, but if you go to the Center for Courage and Renewal, you can find it. But the way they define these questions are questions primarily that the questioner could not possibly know the answer to. So it's a great antidote to the sort of question that is a thinly veiled suggestion or a shaming activity or any of the other kinds of questions that in at least the white Western and primarily academic cultures that I'm familiar with, we're really good at. I have a point to make. I will put a question mark at the end of it. They also, open and honest questions often ask about feelings as well as facts. They arrive without an agenda. They are brief and to the point. They sometimes are intuitive as much as anything else. An example from a set of conversations last weekend that I was in, which was a relevant context, somebody was saying that she really struggles because she says yes all the time. And she feels like that's limiting her capacity to do stuff. And the question that emerged really strongly for me is, what does it feel like to say no? And it's not, you know, I can't say what you should be saying yes or no to, but that question can allow your own inner wisdom to come forward, right? And so that is typically an aspect of what we are working towards when we shape a question. So this isn't tell us about the most high impact practices of convenings that have worked for your network. That's a great question, but not so much for ripple effects mapping, because it puts people back in that positive, well, let me see, what were the practices that they used, and then let me pull from the list. What we offered instead is a more open and honest question about, you know, tell us a story, right, about how convenings made a difference in the network. It does posit that they do make a difference. That's rooted in our own conviction that it makes a difference. I will also say that some people, I have posed questions in this practice in the past, and some people are like, that's not the right question for me, which is very fruitful. And then we can work with that, and maybe we want to modify the question.
If I may,
Yes,
Anna, just because
please, yes.
I think these might be helpful to folks before they go into their breakout rooms to just quickly speak to. Do folks need to be trained in appreciative interviewing before the session? And also, what is there any budget guidance? So as people are thinking, let's help them to feel confident that they're creating something that they can afford to do.
Yes,
Given where
excellent
they are. So
questions.
if you could speak to those 2 points before we
Yep.
send people into their breakout,
Perfect.
I think that would
Thank
be
you.
helpful.
Yes. So budget constraints, first and foremost, the practices that the three of you spoke to. When any convening happens, we need to make sure that people can comfortably be there. So thinking about the needs of your participants, honoraria for them are lovely, childcare, food, transportation reimbursement if it's in person. The primary cost of ripple effects mapping is your facilitator. And honestly, one of the reasons that I love it is because it enables me to do really high impact work with low budget organizations for a very low cost. It's typically 2 hours of prep, 2 hours of session, 2 hours of follow-up or data work for kind of the simplest package. And then depending on who your facilitator is and, their rates, but it's vastly, you tend to get a whole lot more for that amount of money than you would from a conventional evaluation practice. So those are my thoughts on budgeting. Tell me again the first question, Carrie.
Is it necessary to train people in appreciative inquiry before they start interviewing each other? Is that helpful? Are we over indexing positivism?
Yep. So I would say no, it's not mandatory. Yes, it's terrific if you can. There are some groups where it really might be mandatory, especially people who are trained in criticism and are trained to think about the problems and the issues. Let's identify the problem. This is the opposite of that. It's let's identify what's working. Let's identify the strength, the most beautiful thing that emerges. And so sometimes people need help on that. The guide that we gave you a link to is my solution to that. It's still a little bit dense, but I will often take, say, 5 or 7 minutes to kind of walk through that, give, as I did with you, just a very brief overview. So it's helpful and makes a difference. Yes. I see another hand up. Katie?
Hi, yes. I just have a question in the same vein. Do you find it beneficial to sort of start with like a ground rule or like a way to build trust in this space? Or do you find that you prefer to build trust between pairs of participants? And in that way, do you specifically try to pair people with perhaps similar experiences or completely different experiences?
Yes, excellent questions, and speaks to this, the last question of the three, who are you going to invite? If you are working with a program where, so for example, I taught cohorts of community engaged faculty for many years when I was at Cornell. When we used ripple effects mapping, the odds were strong that people from one cohort knew the people from the other. So we would do a 5-year retrospective. So we didn't have to spend a lot of time on trust building because people were likely to know one another, or at least to have some sense of, oh, you're in that department. There wasn't a lot of deep unfamiliarity. If you are working with a group that really may not know each other at all, then it's a lovely idea to have some sort of, get to know you or mutual introductions. If you're doing it in person, maybe a coffee hour in advance. Typically, the description that I offer at the start of what we are doing here today serves as kind of ground rules. And so we will talk about the fact that in storytelling, for example, we don't do crosstalk. We don't jump in when someone is telling their story and say, oh my God, the same thing happened to me. And so typically with ripple effects mapping, I do not do the co-created community agreements practice that I do in almost every other context. Your excellent question is making me wonder if I should, though. My practice might be a luxury of usually working with people who know each other. So it's a great question for all of you to sit with as you think about who your participants are. Around composition, there's great benefit to having people who are comfortable with one another. I always think about squeaky wheels. If I know there's someone in the space whose perspective we know we need, but who is inclined to be super grumpy or talk forever, I may reach out to them in advance and say, I'm so excited to hear what you have to say. I wanted to make sure to go over the guidelines with you because I know it's different, it's weird. There's not a lot of room for crosstalk. There's not a lot of room for one person holding forth. We're sharing the mic, etc. I have in-person situations needed to walk around the space and make close eye contact with somebody to help them draw their contribution to a close. But as facilitators, you're all familiar with those practices. In the sample interview, I only see 10 minutes. So I will go back into that while you are in breakout groups, because it is more than possible that I have some typos in there. So I will check on that. Thank you, Kristen, for your comment there. So Carrie, breakout groups?
Yes, we're ready. So as Anna
Awesome.
mentioned, we're going to be in breakout groups for about 15 minutes. The document that we posted in chat about designing your own session has 3 questions that are highlighted. We encourage you to start there. We know that it's not enough time, but it's a way to get started with people who can be supportive. And so with that, you're going to be in rooms of 3 and have a really good time helping each other step into this process.
And I'll just add, remember to focus on those 3 questions. What is it, 1, 4, and 6?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are you asking?
60 seconds.
I'm perfectly happy with you welcoming people back and offering that, and then we hand it to Adrian. I feel like we've had an awful lot of Anna's voice today. So
okay. I'm also going to ask them to do something. All right.
I'm left with a lot of questions.
Oh, good, because we're going to ask you about arising insights, questions, and challenges. So if you want to start thinking and dropping those into chat, you please be welcome. We're not going to have a lot of time to debrief, but we do want to capture as many of those things as possible so that we can use them and forward them into the community of practice. So welcome back, everyone. I see smiles. I see like a little bit of this. I want to invite you to express yourself with your face, with your body. How are you feeling right now about ripple effects and the stepping into it that you just did? So what is your felt sense of this? And so Anna's doing it on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Wiggling, opening. Yes, I'm going to invite everybody to put their arising insights, questions, and challenges in the chat so that we can collect them. And Scott, give us a short comment.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
There, I don't actually have anything. I just was raising my hand.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for that. What we want to say is that we know that this is a practice and a process of learning, and we want to continue doing that together. That is what we intend to do in our third session of ripple effect mapping, is designing a community of practice so that we can continue. And please consider what your questions, your insights, the challenges that you might have stumbled upon in your breakout groups as you started to think about, well, actually, how do I do this? And we can bring those in and collect those and use them as some of the starting seeds for the community of practice. Anna is also willing, in addition to one of her colleagues that was mentioned earlier as offering training, Anna is being ultra responsive and willing to create a training for folks. And so we will be thinking about when to do that in the next couple of months. And so if you're interested in that, you can reach out to Anna and say, please let me know when it's happening, or you can put your name in the chat and we'll take it down and contact you. So lots of opportunities moving forward in this work for us to think and learn and practice together. So I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing, those of you who shared your stories. Thank you for contributing to each other's development process in your breakout rooms. And as this is a Phyto festival, we want to give Adrian some space to speak and bring us toward the end and put us into that context and remind us of the larger thing that we're a part of. So with that, I'll hand it to Adrian.
Thanks, Carrie. So at the first session, I made like a round of applause with like a sound effect, because of course we need to thank the great facilitators and people who stepped into the fishbowl today and everybody who's been participating. So I can't do the applause thing again. I was thinking we can do like a gratitude shower. I've only done this in person, so I don't know how it's going to translate to the virtual space, but I want to invite you to unmute, please. And then the gratitude shower works like you do this kind of showering movement and you do some kind of showering sound. I think it's more like shh, like this, you know, so we can give it a shot. If you have other sounds that you want to use for rain or showers, feel free to just add it into the mix, okay? So just unmute. And then we're going to do a gratitude shower for all the great facilitators and people in the fishbowl. Okay, perfect. Thank you for the gratitude shower. And I'll just wrap up with a bit more context around the Networks Festival and what else is happening in Phyto. So you have more of that information. Our motto, as every year for the Networks Festival, and I think also for Phyto in general, is if you want to change the world, throw a better party. So that's why we do weird and playful things like gratitude showers and other games. And the purpose of the festival is really to connect, imagine, and rewire how change happens, specifically through relational approaches and through networks, and specifically also systems change. Our Phyto principles, in case you're not aware, is to listen deeply, to share stories, to embrace failure, and to show up authentically as ourselves. So those are pretty simple, no 10-page principles. And this year at the festival, we're innovating in the sense that we have these 6 different festival tracks. So right now you're participating in the ripple effect mapping track, but we also have other spaces around evaluating impact, governance, equitable collaborations, healing-centered leadership, and technology and collaboration. So if you're into any of these topics, just also check out the program for those other sessions. At the moment, only around 10% of people who join the festival contribute financially, and we're trying to sustain these tracks, the long-term groups that are going to emerge from the festival in the upcoming months, like the community of practice in this space, through the festival income. So if you want, you can still consider giving. We're doing this through a gift economy approach. So we're offering our gifts of coordination and facilitation to the network and trying to sustain it in that way. One thing I want to highlight, if you're hungry for more Phyto experiences, right after the festival, we're starting the Fix-It stations. Those are essentially small peer circles of maximum 12 people to get unstuck on some specific challenges that you have in your networks. Again, we have different themes: equitable evaluation, shared stewardship and distributing leadership, playful network culture, so everything around games and joy in kind of networks, how to resource your network. So if you're funding, but also non-financial resourcing, if you have challenges there, you can join there. And also, how do we shift colonial patterns and center equity in our network strategies? So those happen between July and September. There's limited spots, so it's just 12 people per group. And you'll get the sign-up links in the follow-up email to this. And it's also in the festival program, all the way at the bottom. You can sign up to the Fix-It stations there and get more information there. Last thing I want to say is that the festival is like the big thing that's happening every year, but we also have many things coming afterwards. So if you want to keep engaging, there's, again, the Fix-It stations between July and September. We're also having sessions on funding and shifting philanthropy coming up around July and August. So if you're into, shifting philanthropy, that's a good space for you. Then we're going to launch the track experiments, including this ripple effect community of practice. And from September onwards, we're going to co-create what we call Fitoland. And I'm going to give you just a small teaser for that. Right now, we are at the Ripple Lake. We're using like metaphors and actual locations to visualize Fitoland. So right now we're at the Ripple Lake. This is the emerging community of practice, but Fito is much bigger than that. So as you can see, we have many other locations around shifting funding, around storytelling, around consultants and capacity builders, around network governance, and so many different locations. And right now you are just here at the Networks Festival in the common space. And I just want to name that there's many other spaces where you can engage, and we're kind of building right now the infrastructure and the processes so that you can start to flow into Fitoland and find your place and find your way in this very big landscape. So that's it from my end. Thanks so much again for your attention. See you at the next session and anywhere else. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Such a pleasure to connect with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Feel free to interrupt or unmute and say goodbye in whatever language feels most like home to your mouth.
Okay.
Bye.
See you later.
Cheers.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you, Adrian, as always.
Oh, I love Kristen's comment here. That's so nice. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
From the chat just in as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I tried to answer what I could as we were going through. So grateful that Carrie, our group, talked about why our COP is different, because Kristen offered, again, links to the Scott Chasden and the field guide team, their community of practice. And so it was a good occasion to say, so this one is focused just on networks is the difference.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah. Awesome.
What do you need from me other than the recording and then
be terrific. Those two things.
action so they can